Hello, welcome to episode 162 of Mark's Notcast. Today I am going to be talking about the band Idols. I haven't spoken about them before. I think some of you this will be the first time that you've seen or heard me talk about anything. Give you a very quick rundown. Normally I sit in this chair and I talk about old records that have a significant meaning to me. Today I'm going to be talking about not an old record, but a new record that has significant to me. Idol's fourth album, Crawler, which was released on Friday, I think the 12th of November 2021. I have been living with this album for 48 hours, and life sometimes gives you what you absolutely need. You may not necessarily know that's what you want, but it's what you need. Normally I talk about albums that are 30 years old, but obviously today I'm talking about an album that's not even a decade old, not even a year old, not even a month old, not even a week old. This album, 2 days old. And I have to tell you about why this album is very probably my album of the year so far, and also around the meaning that it has to me. I am going to get into some deep personal shit from time to time, but the important thing about art is that all art is good on a subjective level. No one can look at something objectively and go, well, that's objectively good. You know, a building is well designed, it does its job. But a work of art, whatever it is, be it music, film, a book, a poem, a painting, an object, the role of art is to communicate to other people feelings and thoughts and ideas and observations. And great art succeeds in communicating, even if it doesn't necessarily communicate to that many people. Now, over the past 4 years, I became an Idols fan 4 years ago. Idols have become much, much bigger. And as far as I'm concerned, that's absolutely brilliant. I want the bands I love to be absolutely huge and loved by many, many people. Because firstly, there is a strength and a community in that, and secondly, it enables the artists to continue to make their music and their art without having to have one eye necessarily upon their budget and whether they can continue to do this at all times. Because since this country lacks a universal basic income, art cannot exist in a vacuum. Crawler is most definitely the product of the survivors of the COVID apocalypse. Now, on the front of the album, there is some wording from Joe, and the wording from Joe, I think, really sets forward the manifesto or statement of intent for the album. It kind of explains what the album is and where it comes from. And I must admit, when I heard the title for Crawler, I wasn't sure what Crawler actually meant, but I do now, and I'm going to explain. Although I suspect you've already worked out what that meaning is. Crawler, I was on my knees, but I was not begging nor praying. I was just getting by, and I survived my traumas and the savage bastard cycle of addiction by half a whisker. Survival isn't just the end release of centered jubilation, it's all the ugly, vicious, and lonely steps along the way. I look back now and see just how beautiful life is. To recover is beauty, but to be carried by the embrace of care and luck is ecstasy. I am grateful, I am a crawler, I am alive, all is love. So, with my personal history, I have to tell you that I too am a crawler, and I think many people are. When my father was younger, he told me that I was a plodder. He was never the most diplomatic of men. He described how I approached any situation as somebody who plodded through it, who just kept going, all the way through it, like I was some kind of human Duracell bunny or a head banging endlessly against a wall, slowly, incrementally, step by painful step, making progress through to the other side of the wall that was keeping me prisoner. My dad thought of it as probably a plodder. What he should have said was determined. I have a brother. He described my brother as somebody who didn't have to work. He just did it, and he was able to do it without having to put any effort in, and I had to put the effort in. That's a pretty cruel description of someone to hear from your dad. I pretty quickly learned that I wasn't going to idolise my dad. He was a flawed person in many, many ways, and presumably still is. And I have a difficult relationship with him, which I'm not prepared to go into because we'd be here forever and everyone would be like, really? You're going to talk about that? No, not today. But Crawler, for me, this album is an album that I've never heard an album that quite describes or it articulates, a human being's approach to and through trauma and to survival. Um, I've had some really difficult events in my life. I've had some terrible relationships. I've had some fantastic ones as well, and I've been very, very lucky to have experienced those. And I think perhaps sometimes um, that I'm not always appreciative of what those things are. I've had my battles with mental health, depression, addiction, and other behaviours, compulsions, for example. I know I've got the kind of personality that doesn't do just a bit. Um, if I'm going to have a drink, I want all the drinks. If I'm going to have sex, I want all the sex. If I'm going to have records, as you can probably work out, I want all the records. Um, and I have an addictive personality. I want everything, and I have an interesting and complicated relationship to pleasure. Primarily being is it's taken me a long time to work out when enough is enough. I've often only realised I've gone too far, to quote the great Joey Tribbiani, is when you've gone so far beyond the line you can't even see the line anymore. I spent quite a bit of time in therapy. You can probably work that out from the way that I talk. You can tell by listening to certain things that people have or haven't been through therapy. I have spent a lot of time thinking about who I am, how I behave, and my behaviours, and how I can be the best human being that I can be. And as Crawler kind of indicates, survival is not a destination, it's a journey. It's a process and it's progress, and it happens day by day and step by step, and you never really arrive at the final destination of survival. Because ultimately survival is an experience, it's not a holiday resort. So for me, Crawler is a really brilliant album, and I'm going to talk about every song on the album, and I think my relationship to it. It starts with MT 420RR, which is a make of motorcycle. Perhaps could, if you don't have that motorcycle, be described as a penis extension. Um, there's a great kind of saying, which is that if you haven't got it, flaunt it, and so the more you flaunt something, the less you actually have it. And MT420RR is the make and model of motorcycle that Joe Talbot was nearly in a fatal car crash with at some point. It's a powerful song. It's a gentle song, and for some reason, although it describes the beginning and aftermath of a car crash that nearly killed him, for me, there's a lot of words in there that mean an awful lot to me. He starts singing around it's February, I'm cold and I'm high, and for me, February is the cruelest month. Now, everyone has a least favourite month, by the way. My least favourite month is February. I've had two very, very difficult and disastrous events happen in February in two separate years. And for me, February is the month that I dread the most. The fact that this accident, this lyric opens with it's February, I don't know how, but god damn it, it made the whole thing. I related to everything about it. Because in February, I wasn't ready for the storm that was about to come. It was cold, I was high on life, things were going well for me, and on two separate occasions in February, my life was hit by a car crash. Not an actual figurative four wheels on the road thrown over the bonnet car crash, but completely unexpected events that took me for six, that I couldn't see coming, that no one could see coming. Um, One was the end of a relationship, and one was the end of a job. Both of which were things which I treasured and appreciated, and both of which were taken away from me at very, very short notice, and which the reasons behind which have never been adequately explained to me in a way that makes sense to me. Those things, the ending of those things, clearly make sense to the people that have been involved in making those decisions to remove me from their lives in either a professional or a personal way. But for me, I looked at it and I went, I don't think those reasons are good enough for the pain and the impact and the misery which those particular events impacted upon me. I really struggled with them, and so when Joe sings about "Are you ready for the storm?" I wasn't. I wasn't ready for the storm at all. In fact, I didn't even see it coming. Normally, I can see most things coming a mile off. These things, I didn't see them coming. They knocked me down, and I got up And the thing that matters when you get knocked down is that you get up, that you keep fucking going, as the song says, that you be a Rottweiler. And this album, I suddenly realised this is an album about surviving trauma. It's an album about surviving very, very difficult circumstances. And sometimes the only thing that you've got is yourself to get you through that. Now, obviously, as Joe kind of says in the lyric sheet, is that there is, has love and support around him, and I've had love and support around me whilst I've been battling my various respective demons and my various, invisible enemies. But what I found was no one was going to give me a handout through this. I had to crawl my way through it. It felt like I'd been thrown off the top of a building, and I had to crawl my way back to wherever I had been before. So when the relationship came to an end, it took me 9 years and 11 months, near enough, to get to a point which was anywhere near where I had been a decade before. I had been pushed back. I think about the time that I spent. That decade was really tough. There were times when I was so stressed that I would run my hands through my hair and my hair would literally come out in my hands. I was visibly going bald through stress at points through that decade. And it took me 10 years to find something which it was even more incredible and amazing than the thing which I had lost. And so for me, the title track, no, not the opening track, MT420RR, somehow I knew that made this album. This album feels like I could have written it. I could have written it through surviving the experiences that I've had and the traumas which I've experienced. There's a line in there about he lost control on the first song, and I lost control when I had those terrible events happen to my life. I didn't have control over what was happening, because what was happening was most definitely not anything I would ever have chosen for me or even my worst enemy. In one case, I found myself really fucking poor and on my own in a flat I couldn't afford to live in because I'd made the decision on 2 incomes and I found I had 1 income. And on the second occasion, again, if it was something that I'd seen coming, I would have ducked it. I know I would have ducked it. Because it took me many years for me to come back from that particular event. It took me 5 years for my career to get back to where it was, because there was a stigma, there was a weight, there was a shadow that hung around me, whether I liked it or not, as a result of what had happened. The second song is The Wheel. The Wheel is, the song is about Joe's mother and her alcoholism, and around how that affected who she was. But to me, there's another meaning around the wheel. The wheel is the endless circle of life. And also, the thing about the wheel is that it reflects, the circular nature of days. There's 24 hours in a day. There's 365 days in a year. There's a circle of life that goes on and on and on, and it never stops, ever. And even if mankind gets wiped off the face of the planet, the wheel will still turn. And the wheel is a big metaphor on this album, because you think about MT420RR, vehicles are driven with steering wheels. The wheel is an object that rotates and it keeps going, and there's always forward motion. Even if you're not actually getting anywhere, the wheel always turns. And the other thing about the wheel is that, and it's difficult to describe this in a way that makes sense, that doesn't make me sound like I'm disappearing up my backside. The wheel was a medieval torture device. It was called the breaking wheel. People were broken on the wheel. And the wheel, to me, in this album, acts as a metaphor for life itself. People are broken on life. Life is cruel and unthinking and uncaring, and it keeps going, and it doesn't matter what you think about it, or whether you like it, or whether you can take it. The wheel will keep turning, and we are shackled to it. And sometimes it feels like we're in an abusive relationship with reality. Reality being, as Philip K. Dick said, reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, doesn't go away. The wheel is life, and that was where this second song is. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God. And you can even see it on the cover of the album. The cover of the album has a man in a spacesuit. in everyday circumstances. So in this case, standing outside a brutalist building, on the inside, standing inside what looks like an airlock, but it isn't. It's just, you know, the entrance hall to a block of flats. The inference here from this imagery is that life is toxic and it is hostile, and you can't survive without some kind of protective layer around you. And that protective layer, whatever that may be, it may be drugs, it may be alcohol, it may be sex, it may be music, it may be, you know, love and compassion and cats, whatever it is. Life is really tough out there. It's a hostile environment. The world is out to kill you, and you cannot survive on your own. You need something to make your way through it. And that's where I think the wheel and the album cover and the imagery is really powerful. You know, you can tell that this album has been made by a set of survivors that have been through things that no human being should experience, and they've come through the other side, and sometimes the way out is through. There is that bullshit line about what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That is bullshit. I have been in situations that would have killed lesser people or different people, and I tell you what, it didn't make me stronger. It made me weak as a fucking kitten, and it made me, you know, even now I'm having to deal with the scars and the trauma of those events. I had to deal with the fact that I had an addictive personality as a result of that, because, you know, the things that I saw other people enjoying in life, things like, yeah, money and relationships and all that type of stuff, they were things that were really difficult for me. Nothing was handed to me on a plate. I had to work for everything, and I had to work really hard. But I'm a plodder. I'm a crawler. That's what I did, and Crawler is, it feels like it's an album that's written about someone like me. I know it isn't, but it feels like that's what it's about. And the whole thing, you know, it didn't make me stronger. It made me weaker, and it made me more. What's the word I'm thinking of here? You know, more susceptible to giving in to temptation. So, you know, the battles that I've had with various pleasures, the inability to say no to certain things. This album understands that. It's really difficult to self-regulate when you self-medicate, and it was really difficult for me to know when too much was too much, and was able to pull back from it. As you also know, I had a very scary event about 3 months ago. I had a seizure. I was unconscious for a number of minutes, and they still don't know what that is. It wasn't. They started off and they thought, well, it's a heart attack, but it's a weird one. And then they went, no, it's definitely a cardiac arrest or some kind of cardiac event. They then went down to, well, it's a seizure, but it might be diabetic, it might be epileptic. They've ruled out the diabetic part of it. They don't quite know exactly what it is. If you follow me on social media and my friends, you'll see that I've been through EEGs and MRIs and blood tests and all these things, trying to work out what it is that nearly killed me. The theory that the NHS have, and God bless the NHS, is that after spending so long in a state of heightened awareness and a kind of like almost your body being filled with panic and crisis chemicals, is when we started to come out the other side of the COVID situation, is that my body was suddenly unable to function without having that influx of emergency crisis chemicals, and effectively it shut down and reboot it. I now run on Windows 12. It's fantastic in the future. But also, it was a moment where I suddenly realised I'm not immortal, I'm not invincible. You know, sometimes I treated my body like a temple. It was a temple of doom. I used to think I could pour anything into it and do anything I wanted to it, and it would just keep going because it hadn't failed me yet. And I was very, very wrong. You know, I've now had to work on, you know, my weight and my health, and you know, drastically cut down on things that are bad for you that taste good. I cut down my drinking dramatically on Thursday, I think it was the 8th of March 2019. That might be a Friday actually. And I'm now at the point where I've accepted myself and love myself. But what it means is that, you know, you cope with traumatic events and experiences by pleasure, and you go, I've fucking earned this. You know, I have been through hell. I deserve my heaven. And it's an important thing to be able to do that. But you know, obviously I've got a much better relationship to it now. I might finally, don't tell anybody, become a grown-up. But it's an important battle to fight. Crawler is about this same battle to survive things that would have killed you. the harsh sandpaper edges of reality that you can't avoid. And song 3 on here, When the Lights Come On, that's around, and that's about when you're the oldest guy at the party, when you don't recognize the people around you, when everyone around you is 10, 15 years younger. It's 4 a.m. in the morning, and you're going, we're looking for the next party, and you realize that it can't get any better than this. And that's both terrifying and exhilarating. But when you realize is that you put the same inputs in, you're not getting the same outputs. You can't keep getting that moment of bliss where everything goes away. It just will not continue and perpetuate itself forever. And what the light, when the lights come on, it kind of says that's the end of the night. That's when you've got the moment when you wake up and you see what William Burroughs calls the naked lunch moment. The moment when you look at your fork and you realise you're not looking at dinner. What you're looking at is actually a cooked bit of an animal or something, and you go, this is the reality that I have to believe, that I have to live in, that when I stop believing in it will not go away. Track 4 is Car Crash, and Car Crash is a song that obviously is about a car crash, pretty surprisingly, but it's got a really brilliant lyric in it. Like many of them, it says, I did not come from nothing and nothing came from me. And it's kind of around that moment of impact. So you've got, the first one, MTT 420RR. You can see the tragedy occurring. It's coming right at you. You can't duck it. The wheel, that's the moment of realization, the moment of impact. When the lights come on, that's the moment when, just after it finishes, when you realize you can't escape it anymore. And Car Crash is obviously the aftermath of that. That's the event when reality hits and doesn't go away. Track 5 is The New Sensation. The New Sensation is very, very clearly inspired by Rishi Sunak and the lack of funding that the arts had last year during the COVID-19 crisis, when the suggestion was that people that were artists, musicians, poets, writers, to quote the loathsome Dominic Cummings, the ballerinas get to the back of the fucking queue, is what he said. And the idea being that if you create art, you are useless. The only thing that is beautiful is money. We are economic units of production. Our worth is only linked to the amount of money and profit that we can generate for other people. And the New Sensation very much has a lyric that's aimed at a clear refutation of that. The government put out some adverts about retraining in cyber, and so the lyric is about, well, you retrain, you go from the left to the right brain, and you become a dancer. Hallelujah. It's a very clear middle finger to the kind of cruel, money-minded politics and ethos that thinks that the only thing that matters is beautiful, beautiful profit and money and power, and money and power and beautiful money and beautiful power. Track 6, Stockholm Syndrome. I don't know if any of you have heard of what Stockholm Syndrome is. It's around, I think it was largely inspired by, was it Patty Hearst, I think, who was kidnapped and later fell in love with one of the kidnappers. Stockholm Syndrome is when actually you become in love with something that is very, very bad for you, and you think the thing that's bad for you is actually really good for you. It's a terrifying situation to be in. If you've been in a bad relationship and you know that person is unhealthy and rotten and dirtier than a bag of carrots, and you know that you're trapped with a person and you can't escape them, and the way that they're treating you is unfair or it's cruel, to some respects, that's Stockholm Syndrome. But that's Stockholm Syndrome after you've woken up and you realise what's going on. There comes the point when, if you're in a relationship with somebody and it's abusive, and like there's a man that's very, very possessive, and he stops you from talking to other men because he doesn't want you to talk to other men because he wants to have you all to himself, depending on your point of view, that's either really sweet and loving, or that's like, girl, so many red flags there, it could be a Wire album cover. Run, fucking run. Sorry, I know the Wire album is called Pink Flag, but there you are. But you know what I mean, right? And then we've got some absolutely just, I mean, where do I go? There's also there's a lyric in Stockholm Syndrome, which I don't know if I can remember it correctly. He mentions a thing called the Humes Guillotine, which is a philosophical concept. The philosophical concept is around the absolutism of is versus isn't, and the existence of where you say, well, something is, and then you say something ought to be. So the gap between what life is and what life ought to be. And there's a big chasm that's in between there, because you can look at it and you go, well, life ought to be me, 2.4 children, a Ford Mondeo, a good job, a final salary pension, and a mortgage that's paid off. And then you go, well, actually, what is that? What is that an absolute, or is that a relative? And if you don't recognise the fact that is and ought are two sometimes mutually opposing concepts, what you end up with is actually a situation which is all light and no shade. So you've got to be able to recognise the negativity that exists in a certain situation. And what you've got to do is you've got to put some value on facts as opposed to aspirations, and go, right, so this is where I am, this is what I'm living, this is the world that I have. Let's look for the positive elements that live inside that, and then let's take those positive elements forward and see what happens with it. But also, of course, sometimes the glass is half empty, sometimes the glass is half full, sometimes the glass has got the wrong drink in it and you want another drink. And that's how it is. But Stockholm Syndrome is, I think, a great song lyrically. I mean, one of the problems I had with the Ultramono album was that the lyrics were very unfiltered, very first draft. This album, those lyrics have really been thought through, they've been pored over, they've been considered, they've been explored. The meanings are there if you're there to look. It's an album that rewards repeated listening and really getting to grips with the nuances of the language that sits within it. Right, so the Beachland Ballroom is the name of a ballroom in Ohio, by the way, and that is a venue that you go on the way up. I know also a venue that you go when you're on the way down. One of my worries, you've been looking at the LP cover for a long time, so I'm going to turn the LP cover around to give you something slightly different to look at. And then we've got Crawl. Crawl for me is one of the most important songs on the album, by the way, and this is where you have to go. So Crawl is the turning point. You take the album out of its inner sleeve. There's the quote from Joe, by the way, and then you take out the Eco Mix vinyl, and here is Eco Mix vinyl. I'll explain what Eco Mix vinyl is at the end if you're prepared to wait long enough for me to do it. So the song Crawl, I think, is a really pivotal part of the LP. It's really important into understanding what the album is about. And Crawl obviously takes its line from Crawler. So the crawler being you're somebody that you haven't got the skills, the muscle power, you haven't got the circumstances to be able to walk or run through a situation. You have to crawl. And when you start through the process of recovery, when you break the circle of addiction, you don't. It's not like a magical moment where suddenly you break free of the fog and the clouds and you're in the sunshine. The moment when you start to turn around, it takes a long time until you get out of that mist and that fog and that mud, and then suddenly you have to crawl your way through it day by day, second by second, one day at a time, until you get to the other side of it. And it's only when you come out the other side is that you realise you are where you were always meant to be. You realise that perhaps I've had moments in my life where things have been incredible, and at the time I've just had a tiny voice in my head, and it only happens for a fraction of a second, and it goes, savor this moment. This is it. This is, one of the peak experiences of your life. Now, there's a theory that about 2% of humans have a thing called a peak experience. That is a moment where they are, at the absolute zenith of their consciousness, and where they suddenly go, my God, this is, life at its absolute best. And if you're in recovery from something, whatever that thing is, and if you're trying to escape from and build from and build through and work through trauma, you're in that situation where you have a peak experience. And sometimes the peak experience, like for me, for example, it's been walking down an alley holding the hand of someone that I love, or it's sitting in a bar and laughing with somebody and I'm not completely fucking drunk. Or it's a moment where you sat there and you're in the same room as a band that you love that has helped form who you are, and you're going, this is it. When I first listened to this music, when I was lost and as a child, and I didn't know what life was meaning, and I was listening to music for the first time, and I was going, suddenly I understood the map of the world. Music was the map for me that helped me find my way through a world that I was lost in. And sometimes when I'm in the same room as the bands that I love, I have moments where I'm like, that's it. I am I am in the only place in the universe I want to be right now, communing in a crowd with thousands of people who are like-minded individuals, and we're all feeling the same thing. We're all feeling some kind of bliss, some kind of moment where we're set free from, all the petty constraints of reality. And suddenly the fact that, someone lied to you, or someone broke your heart, or someone did something awful to you, or you got fired, or you've got no money, you forget all of that and you become who you are. When I've and sometimes you achieve this kind of moment of bliss when you're playing a musical instrument and you're just at one with the instrument and you don't even think about what you're doing. It's all instinct. Or when you're running, or and if you are, sometimes dealing with trauma, if you've got an addictive personality, that moment will happen when you're behaving in a manner that's probably quite self-destructive sometimes. When you're ripped to the tits on drink and drugs, when you're absolutely smashed, or when you're having dirty sex, those type of things, where suddenly everything else goes away, and that's what you're chasing, is that thing where you get a peak experience, where you escape all the things about reality that don't work for you. And Crawl as a song is a song that is the start of that process. It's saying you've started to turn around, you've started to change the direction that you're going in. And if you don't want to do it, no amount of external input will make you do it. You can't do it just because someone tells you should do it. The thing that has to change is the thing inside you. And I remember a very distinct moment when the switch flipped in me, and I was like, suddenly, I was like, I don't want to be here. I'm not enjoying this. This isn't who I am. It was about 9:40 on a Thursday, and I was drunk in a bar, and I suddenly was like, this isn't me. This is me hiding who I am. This is me being somebody who I shouldn't be. This is me being selfish. This is me being an idiot. This is me being, spending money on things that are dangerous, or things that will hurt me. Um, and from that moment on, I became a different person. I became a better, more considerate person. And Crawler is an album that is just shot through with discussion around being the best human being that you can be, and about digging yourself out of a hole that other people have put you into. And there's a line about on my knees for porcelain, because I felt like God to me. And there's a joke about speaking to God on the white porcelain telephone. Billy Connolly's joke about being sick. Um, and I had a number of times when I was sick in a toilet, and I was like, before that, I was like, I felt incredible, amazing. I felt more handsome, funnier, wittier, more sexy. And at the same point, I knew it was all a lie. And sometimes that lie is not something that's going to sustain or nourish you. So Crawl is about the turning point, the moment when you change, the moment the switch flips in you and you go, I'm going to be someone else and someone different. Now, I should have turned this over to side 2, side F, more correctly. The next song, the song that follows Crawl, is Meds, and it's the title is very, very relevant. It's chosen for two things, because it's around medicate and meditate. Now, if you're somebody, there's a line about smash pills, feel no fear. It's almost about when you self treat yourself to whatever it is, in whatever form that thing comes. And there's been moments when one could argue that I've been self-medicating, but actually what I've been doing is I've been meditating. I've been losing myself, and I've been trying to achieve some higher state of consciousness through whatever it was that I was doing. And those things were, they were not healthy. They were not sustainable. And there's another kind of element to meds, is about imposter syndrome. If you look at Boris Johnson and go, look, no matter how much anybody else in the world feels that they have imposter syndrome and that they don't deserve the place they do, trust me, it's never bothered Boris Johnson. Imposter syndrome is that thing that in your ear, your head, that tells you, you don't deserve this, you don't deserve happiness, you don't deserve this job, you don't, whatever it is, you don't deserve. And it's not true. If you can do it and other people believe it, then that is something that you are. And it's a very dangerous thing, actually, imposter syndrome. It lies to you, it whispers in your ears, and it tells you that you're just really good at fooling everybody else. Now, if you're autistic, or anything like that, you'll completely understand imposter syndrome and masking. The concept of masking being is where you will mask certain behaviours, attitudes, feelings, approaches because you don't want to be caught out. And sometimes I've felt like I've been a foreign agent, undercover behind enemy lines, hoping that I won't get found out by other people who will realise who I really am, and who I really am is, not the witty, wonderful, good-looking person. And I've had to deal with that a number of times in the past week or so. I felt very down on myself, and I felt, to be honest, quite, ugly and fat and old, and lots and lots of things which, may be true, but I don't necessarily believe them. But sometimes that, when your brain tells you that, it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. What matters is it feels true. And I've been very down on myself about that recently. And I'm not going to talk about why. I know why, but I'm not going to. So this is the deluxe version, by the way, of the album Crawler. It comes in an orange PVC sleeve with the statements on the front, and with the track listing and the credits on the back. Let's open it up, because you've been looking at the other album cover for a while. Time for something a little bit different. This is a little harder to get out of the sleeve, by the way. This is on this kind of lovely burnt orange kind of vinyl. So you're going to look at that for a bit instead, if that's okay. So we go to Progress. There are 3 real vocal songs right now to go in the album. One is Progress. And Progress it follows on from Crawl, and it follows on from Meds. And Progress is to me, what I'm inspired by with Progress is the fact that any progress that you make, any steps that you take in the direction towards, recovery and clarity, is progress in itself. And life is nothing but progress. Every day is progress. Not all progress is positive, not all progress is forward thinking, but progress itself is what matters. And all life is forward motion. Even if it's not always necessarily positive forward motion, it absolutely is. And the track King Snake, the penultimate track on the album, has a line about a wheel with no motion. Now, the fact that it's the penultimate track on the album and it mentions about motions and wheels ties back to the second track on the album, so one from the end in both respects, or one from the start, around a steering wheel, around the wheel being that braking wheel, that medieval torture device, and also around the concept of the world itself as a wheel. It endlessly turns and rotates and moves through various things. And so therefore, even though the wheel has no motion, the wheel still exists. And it's odd, because there is no forward motion necessarily with a wheel. It's a circle, it's a lap, it just endlessly replicates itself like the wheels on a car. And then we've got the last song, which I think is an incredible song. It's The End. And the end ends on the lyric that, in spite of it all, life is beautiful. And I must admit, I'm going to quote the band in the Consequence of Sound article, I think, where they talk track by track about it. That line, in spite of it all, life is beautiful, was written by Trotsky in his diary about a week before he was murdered. He was living at his home. He was looking at his wife, the woman he loved, doing something that she loved, gardening. And he knew that Stalin was sending the assassins to kill him. He just didn't know when, and he didn't know how. And he went, in spite of it all, life is beautiful. Survival is beautiful. This is an album by, for, and about survival, about experiencing traumatic events not of your own choosing, and about surviving those events, about moving beyond those events, around not letting the events that try to define you entrap you and define you, but bearing in mind you can't control the events necessarily that always happen to you. What you can control is your response to those events. And it's not to do that bullshit thing to say that everyone's got a choice. You haven't. And when I've been through some of my conversations, and by the way, I haven't gone through cognitive behavioural therapy, because that's bullshit. Cognitive behavioural therapy for me is the approach of trying to change natural and appropriate responses to events and other people that are around you. Instead, I've gone through a period of more compassion-based therapy, where we talk through how people have responded to certain events and how they can understand and articulate their response to those events, and they can stop the body and the brain going for an automatic response to it, but we do something that's far more conscious around it, which is why I don't like crisis situations, because I like to have a couple of seconds to think about what the right response is to certain things. I don't work on instinct. I try to think before, because my instinct is often stupid and does stupid things, whereas my brain has the ability to think through things in more detail. And the end is about that recognition, about that moment that you've been through all of these events and you're coping with all of these events and you've responded to all these events and you've responded to them appropriately. And when I went through my therapy, the therapist said that actually, the anger that I felt about certain ways in which I've been misused, abused, and mistreated by callous people who treat people as if they're nothing more than crisp wrappers to be thrown away when they have no more use for them. I was told that actually I had very appropriate responses to traumatic and unpleasant things that weren't my fault, and that I was a survivor. I don't want to be a survivor. I mean, on one occasion, I was accused of what's the word, being, enjoying my victim status by a particularly fuckwitted person. As if anybody actually wants to be a victim. No, they don't. Trust me, my life was really fucking bad at that point. I didn't want it to be bad. Everything I was doing was trying to make it not fucking bad. All right? I wasn't enjoying being a victim. I was somebody that was in a really tough situation, and I was doing all I could to get out of it. And the end is that, in spite of it all, life is beautiful. We are still here. We are still surviving. We are still getting through this stuff, whatever this stuff is. And we are working towards, as Maslow's hierarchy of needs says, self-actualization, to being who we choose to be, as opposed to being who we have to be to survive certain situations. Look, I've probably spoken far too long about this absolutely fantastic record. I think Crawler is one of the albums of the year. I really, really do. The lyrics are incredible. They're powerful. If you're somebody that's struggles, if you're somebody that's been through traumatic experiences, if you're somebody that's had to survive traumatic experiences, or as that phrase says, some people achieve greatness and some people have greatness thrust upon them. If you've had if you've achieved trauma, or you've had trauma thrust upon you, then you will know that nobody chooses that. Nobody chooses to be unhappy. It's a thing that's imposed upon us, whether we like it or not. And Crawler is a record by, for, about, and aimed at two survivors. We survived this, and we survived COVID. COVID was really bloody difficult, by the way. It was unpleasant. It was evil. It was the closest thing our generation will have come to a sustained war in the UK in the past 50 years or so. It's been a really very, very, very strange time in human history, and we survived it. So what I'm going to say here is, although you've already probably worked it out, this is one of my LPs of the year. Crawler is an important album. It spoke to me. It understood the things that I have felt and seen and done, and not that many records have done it. And it has done so in a way without judgment, but in a way that is compassionate and shows that all is love. I'm going to wrap up here. I think Crawler's one of the albums of the year. It's bloody brilliant, and please give it a listen. You may find a band that you absolutely love. The world is big, the world is scary, it is hostile, but in spite of it all, life is beautiful. Thank you. I will see you again some other time. Bye.